Welcome, friends, to another scintillating edition of the Cyber Mettle Podcast. We are joined today by someone I think collectively the Cyber Mettle organization is going to kind of look to for some guidance internationally. So I'm very excited. Usually, shoot from the hip, kind of figure things out. But like, there's other people trying to solve the problems we're trying to solve here. So why not enlist their wisdom and aid and guidance? But first, let's get through some introductions. Joined as always by Alyson Laterman. Alyson.
Thanks, Omar. Yeah, we are super excited today. I'll give our original usual disclaimer, right? Though I'm a lawyer and I'm here with two cyber experts, we are not your lawyer or cyber expert for the purpose of the podcast. But that said, we are definitely going to be sharing some serious knowledge and wisdom and research, courtesy of our guest of what's going on in Australia, but very much applies here in the United States as far as workforce development and cybersecurity as a profession. So with that, we'd love to welcome with us today, Jakub Zvernia. I hope I didn't butcher that, Jakub. I'm so sorry. Working on it. Jakub is a technical program lead for CyberPath, which is Australia's national cyber workforce professionalization pilot delivered by the Australian Computer Society. He collaborates closely across industry, government, and education to build clearer, more accessible cyber career pathways and strengthen workforce capability at scale, and with a diversity inclusion by design approach, which we at Cyber Mettle absolutely love and believe in as well. Starting his career as a technical practitioner, he has over 20 years experience in government, defense, and the private sector, bringing practical, policy-aware leadership to cyber governance, regulatory risk, and international engagement. His work is helping redefine how the cyber workforce looks in Australia, making it more future-ready, accessible, inclusive, and aligned to real-world needs. Jakub, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
So, we gave the little bio you were nice enough to provide us. What else would you like to share with the Cyber Mettle audience about who you are, how CyberPath came to be, and kind of how that program started and that development process?
I actually don't know where the thinking behind professionalization came about. I sort of deliberately ignored any of the sort of prehistory. I wanted to approach it with an open mind. But my background, as you mentioned, is as a technical practitioner, sort of pivoted a couple of years ago, sort of realized like people think tech's pretty complicated, but it's not really. Computers are pretty logical. They do what you tell them. Worst case scenario, read the manual. And I was pretty interested in people, and I sort of realized that I was looking for a challenge, and you never know what you're getting with people. So it's different every day. I've learned a lot. And at the same time, I was pretty interested in building a legacy and sort of looking at how do we build and grow capability? How do we lift the people across the sector and ultimately protect our communities? So I sort of pivoted a bit in that direction, and that's sort of started in a HR sort of a role, and then sort of morphed into where I'm at today, which is sort of more policy and sort of national strategy focused.
And where did the idea for CyberPath come from? How did that start?
Yeah, so Australia launched its Australian Cybersecurity Strategy in 2023. So it's a 2023 to 2030 strategy. It's about 65 or so pages, and there's sort of broken down into different shields. And Shield 5 is around sovereign capabilities, and under that, there's a whole section around the workforce dimensions, and so building and growing the future workforce as well as the current workforce as well. So that's sort of where it started. The first 2 years of the strategy, I was involved in a group here in Australia called the Executive Cyber Council, which is a government and private sector partnership helping operationalize and execute parts of that strategy. And that first 2 years, we did a lot of work on what we called the Australian Cyber Workforce Playbook, which is now sort of moving away from the theoretical, there's a lot of reports, a lot of echo chambers articulating the problem. Nobody's really sort of thought about, well, where are the tools? Where's the guidance? What do we need to actually do to actually operationalize some of these things? So the playbook was written in a way that sort of helps organizations and individuals visualize their journey and understand what kind of options they've got available to them. How can they challenge some of those traditional operating models? particularly around recruitment and sort of approaches to learning. And that then sort of gave me personally the foundation to now support this work on CyberPath.
What have you found with CyberPath like in Australia, what were the pathways that you were finding into cyber? Like, how did you discover where the pieces that were missing? So were people coming in from hands-on? Were they just coming in from schools, certification? What did that look like? Or what does that currently look like? And where are we trying to shift that to make sure that we have a cyber secure future and economic development?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I sort of consider my own career journey. And when I started 20 years ago, sort of tertiary qualifications were kind of the baseline. It wasn't a mandatory thing, but pretty much any job you applied for had some sort of listing for a degree. Fast forward to today, I still see that in a lot of organizations. I'm not sure why. I think it's just one of those things that nobody's really sat down with our teams, which are typically centralized and do recruitment for all parts of the business, and they haven't really changed some of those position descriptions or recruitment practices. But one of the things that we see quite a lot is a conversation around all these jobs and there's all these opportunities in cyber and you should consider cyber. But the reality is there's actually a massive pipeline of talent ready to enter that workforce. There's a lot of people that are graduating from higher education and some of our vocational education establishments, and they just can't land their first job. So there's obviously a delta between what's taught and what employers are looking for. And then at the same time, we've got a lot of people, like it's well-known sort of fact, it's been researched by the UK National Cybersecurity Council. The cyber workforce is on average 19% more neurodivergent than the general population. So sort of generalizing here, but a lot of people don't perform well in those traditional classroom environments. A lot of people are kinesthetic learners. They learn by doing. Use the analogy of build computer, break computer, fix computer, hack computer, fix your parents' printer sort of thing. That's a journey that a lot of us go on. So being able to articulate those sorts of capabilities, it's the chicken before the egg scenario. Like there needs to be a way of doing that and doing it in a way that is contextualized for the organization, for the role that you're actually looking for. And a lot of people just don't know how to tell that story.
I think it's interesting because that's very much the issues we're seeing here in the States as well. So it's that combination of that, like you said, that delta piece between what we're teaching in school and what the practice looks like. And there seems to be a significant chunk missing as to how do we get the skills to bridge between A and B and to get them there. And, that's the my goodness, that's how you operationalize it. That's that piece that's missing. And, how is CyberPath, like what are some of the ideas that they're considering to help bridge that gap to get people from whether it's hands-on training, right, or higher education? Because like you said, it's not one size fits all. And we at Cyber Mettle feel the same way. We know there are people that are absolutely kinesthetic learners. There's people that go to trade schools. I don't know that there's an answer of you have to do X to get to practitioner, because a lot of it is you learn by build it, break it, do it, repair and repeat as you learn. So what are some of the things or incentives that maybe companies would have to help build that training piece, that hands-on apprenticeship that's needed to bridge that gap?
Yeah, when you say incentive, I hate to say it, but it always does come down to a return on investment. Sort of, it's always about money, right? And the attraction is if we're talking entry level sort of roles or graduates that are desperate to get in, it is a cheaper source of labor. But at the same time, the organization's calculating that risk as well. So are they at the right level of maturity? Do they have the right supporting infrastructure? Do they have if it's a small, medium business, and Australia is overrepresented by SMBs, it's 97.2% of our economy. They don't have the capacity to bring somebody in to be able to coach them, to mentor them. They might not have documented processes and things like that to follow. So there's that sort of a structural issue. But there's also a bigger structural issue, and I don't think this is unique to cyber. I think this is a sort of broader issue where we're still framing jobs, and yes, there's always going to be a bum on a seat, but we still frame jobs around the terminology of an occupation. And what we're seeing now, and kind of a podcast about talking about AI at some point, but there's a lot of displacement and of workers, and it's the same as when computers came in the 1960s. Everybody said, oh, we're going to be working a 3-day working week. And the reality is today we're working a 6-day, 5-day working week. So I don't think that's the case. And the same thing's happening with AI. People will find a place that will be gainfully employed. It's just now pivoting away from looking at it from the job title perspective and now actually starting to look at a skills first approach to the human. So that skills portability piece and being able to articulate what specific tasks you can do is something that I think a lot of organizations are not yet ready for. It's a complete sort of rethink of how we approach recruitment and developing capability. Sort of when you look at it at a government level, that's the language that government uses. It's tied in with our tax system, our statistics organization. That's how we look at migrant policy and things like that. So there's a lot of change that needs to occur for that to actually open up. And that also is one of the barriers that I see for another large segment of the population that would be perfect for cyber. And that's the mid-career professionals. So the people that already have some sort of experience. I always talk about defense veterans as an example. I've discharged from the army. You've sort of been institutionalized to a point, and you don't know how your skills, how that life experience translates into a cyber role. So when I think about an army veteran, like an infantry officer, they've got a mission mindset. They know how to lead a team. They know how to run an incident, but they don't know how to translate that experience into what an employer would be looking for in the cyber world. So I think they're the sort of main structural barriers, is thinking about an individual from a skills perspective, but also understanding the translation from both sides.
Is there still work to be done for some of those career switchers to feel as welcome? Because I'll this is me completely projecting, Jakub. I didn't when I switched, and I felt it's harder now, right? I switched about 12 years ago, and I always say Omar then couldn't break in now, just straight away. I say that also about competing with kids in like traditional college settings, right? I look at my nieces and I look at my sister. I'm like, you raised some savage robots like this. I wouldn't, there's definitely, there's no way I'm getting into school ahead of these two, which is great, but also terrifying in a way, right? Like it's all ramped up, but is there like aspects to what you're doing, right? And what we're thinking of doing on Cyber Mettle where you think that specific care being paid to making or normalizing more career switchers or making them feel welcome or highlighting those skills? Because to your point, veterans transitioning over into cyber is a natural fit, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's a great example.
It's the same mission, different uniform, right?
Period.
But I think there's an interesting point you just raised, which I think is where a lot of work needs to be done. And we've sort of perpetuated this role model, this unhealthy sort of image of what it means to work in cyber through like social media and sort of mainstream movies and things like that. Like you see me, I'm sitting here in a white t-shirt. Like, I'm not in a dark basement. There's lighting.
You have the lights on.
And that's the reality of the workforce, right? Like there are those sorts of roles, there are those sorts of people, but it's not the whole industry. And some interesting data points is when I was working in a HR role, we did a workforce audit of about 1,400 people in the organization, and we looked at who has actually done some sort of tertiary education, and that was about 250 people out of the 1,400. So instantly that tells me, well, you don't need a tertiary qualification to land a job in cyber. But then when we looked at the actual degrees or qualifications that people had done, there were only 60% had actually done a cyber or IT, like a technical degree. And if you break it down by cyber-specific qualifications, it was only 40%. So that tells me that there is a very large number of people in the organization who are some of our best performers. And when I looked at what qualifications they had, it's actually those qualifications in people that have come from legal backgrounds or policy backgrounds or marketing backgrounds. And when I think about the sort of end-to-end capabilities that exist within cyber occupations, a lot of those roles are actually not technical. A lot of those are actually interfacing with the business. They're talking to people. They're dealing with the human firewall. That's driving cultural transformation, developing strategies, all that kind of stuff. Like, not every role is technical, but a lot of people think that that's what this industry is all about.
And I think that, no,
The
that's why we
other
both,
textbook example.
we both nodded. I have 2 lawyers on my team, and I think that this is also a buzzword. So how many, we did operationalize. There's a couple, right? If this was a drinking game, right? Everyone would be getting, but I'll throw another one in here, which is, the democratization of technical skills. This is not to say that tech skills aren't needed, but more and more, I'm currently going through a capstone for a club I'm a part of that, I understand what I'm doing, but I'm vibe coding a lot of it. I'm going back and checking, and I'm, if I run into things, I'm going back and going, okay, let's deep dive and research on XYZ. But it's making that more technical piece of the role much more approachable, less barriers to entry there. So then why are we still kind of gatekeeping along those lines? I agree, Jakub. It doesn't make any sense to me either.
Well, that's an interesting point. And another sort of story I've got there is I was involved in helping set up what we called the CyberCX Academy, which was originally intended to not be fighting like seagulls over chips for the same scarce pool of talent. Like, we wanted to grow our own. So we made that business decision, and this is people from completely different backgrounds, like optometrists, bus drivers, things like that. And we wanted to give them an opportunity in cyber. So teaching them from first principles, like with a common curriculum, which covers sort of end-to-end cyber fundamentals. But then they sort of specialize in a particular practice within our organization. Now, the thing is, we gave those people a paid contract. And so they're earning while they're learning. And from a business perspective, we want to get them utilized. Like, we want to get them on the tools as quick as possible. And once people are on the tools, that's, I think, where there's a real danger point, because from an employer perspective, you want to keep training people. Pay rises and promotions are a short-term strategy for retention. You want to keep challenging people. The best way to challenge people is to help them grow, to help them move into those new positions, and not just upwards, but sidewards and diagonally. A lot of people in tech don't want to become people leaders. They just want to stay on the tools. They want to move into a different area. So nurturing that growth is very important. And yes, it is possible to bring somebody that has no experience in and train them up very quickly. But one of my observations is they're going to be feeling imposter syndrome all the time, right? Now, what I mean by that is, if you consider like a GRC consultant, they're looking through a list of controls. They're going in, doing an audit, and going into an organization, fronting up to somebody who does probably have a pretty solid technical background and saying, hey, you need to fix this, or this is broken. And they don't actually know what they're asking the customer to do. They don't know the complexity of addressing that control requirement. And so if they stop learning and don't continue growing that capability, they're going to be stagnant. And that's a problem, because particularly for those mid-career professionals, which sort of may have been at the top of a different career path, they potentially may have taken a pay cut to break into cyber at an entry level. And so they're doing that return on investment calculation of like, is this the right path? Have I made a bad choice? And they end up leaving, which is not what we want. So that's one problem. But then the other problem is, if we don't promote those people, if we don't give them pathways upwards, sideways, diagonally, then we're not creating more capacity within the system for the next intake. So we need to, there's so much focus on how do we get entry-level people in. And I don't see enough attention of how do we get the people that are already in that entry level and give them shortcuts? How do we accelerate their pathways? I use the example all the time of a cybersecurity architect. And this is one of the ones that I want to do as part of our minimum viable product for CyberPath, because what is the pathway to becoming an architect? Sure, there are courses you can do. You can go off and do a SABSA or a TOGAF certification that teaches you how to use a framework, but it doesn't teach you all the other stuff that you need to know day in, day out to be a successful architect. So what is that shortcut? What is that accelerated pathway for those people? Because at the moment, I'm pretty sure you can go ask any architect, you're going to get a different answer from every single one. And a lot of the time it's just been on the job for 10 years and figured it out. And that is one of the hardest to recruit positions. It's one of our most expensive labor heads. So it would make sense to focus on how do we develop talent there, because that's where the skills shortage is. It's not in a lot of those entry-level roles. In the playbook last year, we looked at, okay, well, if everybody says that there's all these jobs, where is the actual demand? What are the actual demand signals from employers? And we landed on 8 priority areas. And out of those 8, I would only characterize 2 of them as being viable entry-level pathways. So those 6 other positions, what is the pathway? How do we get people in those jobs? That's where we need to focus. Yeah, so GRC analyst and SOC analyst, they're your typical sort of entry-level pathways. The beauty of those is you can do them in a safe environment. You can sort of typically working as part of a team. You've got some level of supervision, some level of scripting and sort of process to follow. But that's where that danger comes. If you're a SOC analyst and all you're doing is following playbooks, you don't actually understand what's happening in the background, how an adversary can be moving through an environment. That's going to limit your growth, limit your understanding, sort of black box thinking. But some of those more sort of senior or more difficult entry-level roles is the cybersecurity architect. Another one that came up was the information security manager or a CISO type role. Now, difficult entry-level for somebody straight out of school, but going back to my example of a veteran, is that not the perfect sort of role? Particularly if you're interfacing with a board, if you're interfacing with the executive, you need to know how to talk to people. It's a translation piece, and they can pick up the technical skills pretty easily. Those other skills, the interpersonal skills, the professional skills, the commercial acumen, that's the stuff that's a lot harder to pick up. And things like, if we're starting to talk non-technical skills, characteristics like adaptability, flexibility, resilience, how do you learn that? Last time I checked, there's no bachelor of resilience. There's no bachelor of adaptability. So how do we train that? How do we build exposure to that in a safe environment?
If there were those bachelor's degrees, I would have found them. I would have looked at them. It was just because this is one thing. This echoes a conversation I was having yesterday with formalizing the addition of those skills you just mentioned, Jakub, and not having them go, oh, those you just pick up, right? Because I think that the lack of a formal recognition that A, they're important, period. And then B, they're not something that falls out of the sky. It's a skill set. I mean, I'm living it right now. Became a people leader. People leadership is a whole other bag of candy. And it's something where, and sometimes it's great candy. Sometimes you get something on Halloween where you're like, what adult is giving this to children? Let's go back to this house. Let's retrace our steps. And that's the house that, maybe get some mischief next year. I'm not endorsing that, everyone, but you know what I mean? So it's one of those things where, but I think that the lack of, as you're mentioning, Jakub, you pick up the tech skills, you're good to go. Absolutely not. And same, I love that you teased out the architect role, because that is absolutely, I think, endemic and representative of you just survived for 10 years and then we'll say you're an architect. Well, that could mean that right? Like, honestly,
Show me the
we've
battle
all seen it.
scars.
Yeah, exactly. Like I tried to build this and it tried to kill me, right? Like that's the that's the measure. That's the resilience right there. But then what ends up happening is like it almost it hurts the industry itself, because then you have such a up and down skill level when you could pick an architect, and 10 years in the game doesn't necessarily mean that like you're great at stuff. It just means that you have been gainfully employed in this field for 10 years. There's no minimum floor for skill that then you can check against and go, okay, if I'm hiring this architect or if I'm looking for an architect, this is baseline what I need. And what I love is that you're going kind of holistically end to end. Here's what we got to look at for the funnel at the top of the funnel. Here's what we have to also though mind and tend through the middle and the top of the end of that funnel for the non-entry level jobs. That's a really brilliant approach.
Well, there's a little bit more thinking or rationale behind that as well. And this does actually scare me quite a bit. And I don't know what it's like in America, but in Australia, we're facing an aging population, right? And a lot of people are going to be retiring soon. The people that are retiring, like they're not entry level people. They're some of these experienced people. And the people that are retiring, they're also the people that we need to coach, to mentor, to train that future generation. So we need to find a way to get people up to speed really quickly. Now, further compounding the issue is the fact that everybody's chasing all the new shiny tech. We mentioned AI. We need to start preparing for PQC readiness, and digital identity is becoming pretty hot in Australia as well. But the reality is, we've still got Windows XP kicking around, particularly in government and defense.
We do.
And
I've seen the scans. Yeah. Jakub. Like you're not kidding. That's not hyperbole.
We had a major telco outage in the last week, and it was like some 30-year-old time server. Like, so that skills burden that we have to carry, like we need to understand the old tech and the new tech. So the skills burden's increasing. We're going to have less and less people to train and mentor. So we need to do something about that.
And it's a dishonor that I think is heaped upon, and I'm starting to face this. So this is like a personal issue for me too, is you're above a certain age. I don't know, man. I don't know if this is a young man's game, a young girl's game. Like, hold on. There's people, I love sitting at the feet of folks that have been in here for 30 years. We have some on my team that we're blessed to have. And I just love just listening to how they approach things, and with the understanding of, they don't get distracted by the shiny new tech. They're able to bring that new tech back to, as you mentioned, first principles. I caught that, Jakub. I'm a big fan of that concept too, because it's needed. And they're able to go listen. Yes. And truly then, not to disparage the new tech, they're able to identify then what's really nuanced and new. So you can at least shore up what you know how to shore up, versus throwing your hands up at AI and saying, this is it. There's no defenses. Well, wait a second. Unpack what you can defend and what we've been approaching in good ways for years. And then let's, really get our heads together about the truly, honestly new stuff. But if you're not honoring that wisdom that these folks have, you're not going to hear about it before you force them out the door. It drives me nuts.
Yeah. And the first principles thing's funny. There's a lot of talk at the moment about frontier AI and sort of impacts of AI. And the reality is, like, you still fall back on those first principles, like defense in depth. Like the attack types fundamentally haven't changed. Like the scale, the accessibility, the speed has changed, but we're still defending organizations in the same way. And where I actually think we need to pivot a little bit is in how we approach learning. And, there's a lot of organizations that's their sole purpose is to drive courses and certifications, and not saying that that's bad, like that has its place. But if we consider learning as an assurance piece that builds capability for the individual, but also assures the organization, that's actually where we need to move. And before I mentioned resilience, adaptability, exposure as an example, like how many organizations are running tabletop exercises? How many organizations are doing purple teaming? going off and doing threat hunting is part of their SOC activity. Like that is a way of validating your detections. It's a way of giving your staff exposure in a safe environment under controlled circumstances, so they can grow, so they can detect things and learn things that they haven't done. So it's mutually beneficial, but sort of find that either organizations don't know how to operationalize that sort of concept, or they're just too resource constrained to make it work. So a bit of a pivot in that direction, and rewarding or more positive reinforcement around things like bug bounty programs, contribution of open source repositories and like detection codes and things like that. So that's where I'd love to see a lot more emphasis. It's a bit of a mixed bag, and just for context, the way the higher education system works in Australia takes many years for a course to be approved. And then from an equity point of view, say it's a 4-year degree, somebody can do that part-time. So if you offer that, you need to hold those courses open, those units open for 8 years. So you're talking about a 10-year cycle, essentially, before you can update something. So that's not a fault of it's not a fault of the institution. It's a fault of the system, right? And it works for every other sector, but it's a one size fits all, unfortunately, from a policy point of view. But you can gamify that. Like, yes, you have this specific unit you need to teach. Yes, there's a specific outcome. And I'll use pen testing as an example. Like, you might have a curriculum that says, hey, we're going to do all this fun hacking stuff. Okay, cool. The customer doesn't pay for fun hacking. They pay for you to inform on their risk posture. So can they design assessment, or can they include, scoping and engagement, establishing the rules of engagement? How do we write up that report? How do we present that report? How do we defend the findings of that report? Like walking through that entire life cycle, which is what our customers pay us for, which is what our employers are looking for from a skill set perspective. Is that not something that can be taught? Is that just a way of, it's the pedagogical technique, it's the way that it's taught, rather than focusing on the prescriptive curriculum?
Honestly. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing that I'm very conscious of in terms of the work to be done for CyberPath is, yes, it's focused on the individual. Like, it's a professionalization program. It's about standards. It's about accreditation, all that kind of stuff. But the actual real sell is not to the practitioner. The sell that we have to do is to the organization. So a lot of those things that we were talking about earlier about outdated recruitment models, not understanding what to look for, you're getting a neurodivergent autistic person, sitting them in an interview to test their technical capabilities, you're not going to get the best outcome. So I think a lot of the education or awareness actually needs to happen at the employer level, at the board level, to understand what the capability requirements are like, understanding where they've got the gaps and how to build the skills to address those gaps. That's where a lot of the work needs to be done. So a lot of that sort of workforce consulting and advisory, a lot of the sort of analysis or review of some of those processes. And at the same time, there's that diversity and inclusion element as well. So being conscious, if we want diversity in thinking, if we want a diverse workforce that represents a community that we're protecting, we need to make sure that we have the right policies, the right processes, the right supportive environment for them, for everybody, so that they can bring themselves to work. Because we're going to get people in, but then we'll lose them pretty quickly if it's not the right fit.
Well said. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's one of those things where you're gonna lose the opportunity for some amazing people that you can have on your teams. I'm thinking of just our team, right? There's folks on different parts of that spectrum, but they're such absolute pillars of our entire stack of people, process, and technologies. Like, I couldn't imagine not having the 5 people I'm thinking of on the team. We would be completely, like, our maturity would plummet. They're that vital. Tells me for resiliency that we need to maybe cross train and get other folks to kind of get that skills matrix up there. But you're absolutely correct, and like you said, if we're not representative of the communities that we're protecting, I think that there's a bit of maybe moral bankruptcy, but also just skills bankruptcy there. You're robbing yourself of a whole other part of
Put it to you this way: if everybody thinks the same way, if everybody acts the same way, the adversary is going to know what that looks like. They'll be able to playbook
Exactly.
that and work around it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we want diversity in thinking.
Big time.
But yeah, I think the only way to encourage that, and you sort of asked about incentives, and I guess that's my real call to action for employers as well, is a lot of those programs, sort of whatever you want to call it, like an apprenticeship or work integrated learning or industry-based learning, the top end of town, the larger organizations that usually sign up, but they sort of hit capacity. There's a few reports that we've looked at where we've hit that wall in Australia. So we need more of those smaller organizations to start thinking about how can we make this work, not saying it's too hard or not sort of looking at it from a negative thing and saying this isn't going to work. Start asking the question, how are you going to make it work? Because we have a moral obligation to get those people in to support that future workforce.
Absolutely. I think it's brilliantly said, and it's also very pragmatic of an approach. You're not out here pie in the skying or saying we should do it because we should do it. You're looking to tie it back to we should do it because it's a good business move. And it just happens to also be a great move for the community and just the strengthening of skill sets and also, more inclusivity. But you're not out here just banking on, not doing it charity wise. You're bringing in hard results and you're showing that there's a gap, which I think is then arming your push and arming your organization from the get go with the tools that have sharper edges that are a bit more effective, right? At closing that gap. Jakub, amazing stuff. We're, I think I'll speak for Alyson here, but please, jump in. We're just happy that there's other folks that are trying to crack this walnut internationally. And, I personally want to continue the dialogue and keep learning
Yeah,
from your
like you
approach.
said at the beginning, like one of our design principles is harmonization of effort. Like why duplicate effort and reinvent the wheel? Like work smarter, not harder. So yeah, we're all facing the same problems. We just need to find the right levers to unlock that talent.
Big time. Yeah, good. It's been a pleasure. We'll have you on periodically, I think, in terms of, state of the union or, state of the industry type situations. I could see where maybe, if we get a couple other folks that are maybe trying to do this in different parts of the world, we can get some sort of forum together and try to, like you said, harmonize, swap ideas, talk about what's working, talk about what's vexing us collectively. That could be absolutely a game changer, I think, for helping, all of our efforts out there. In the meantime, I will again express our gratitude for jumping on, and to all the listeners out there. Until we have Jakub back and we're all talking about the wild success that we're
Just
having in
remember,
our respective areas. Yeah,
I had brown hair, not grey hair. It'd probably be grey hair by the time we see.
that's it. It's
There's a lot of work to do here.
it's honestly right. Like there's a lot more pepper or a lot more salt, right? Would it be salt than pepper in the beard these days? I hide it, right? I pluck it out to try to look more youthful so nobody fires me. But yeah, man, I'm with it. I feel that, gonna definitely have you back. And in the meantime, listeners out there, any questions, reach out. There's, we all love talking about this stuff, as y'all can tell. And until the next episode, keep it cyber metal. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Catch you.
Thank you.